All right, folks. There's like 6 people seated. A lot of people in the back know about. We got too much to get through, so we're gonna get started. So for guests and visitors, my name is Steve Fairley, Club President. I'd like to welcome you all to the 11th meeting of the 48th year of the Dublin Rotary Club. Today's invocation and pledge of allegiance will be offered by our very own Jerry Cass.
Oh, thank you. I'm standing in for George Norris, and I'd like to remind you that today is actually International Day of Peace. It's also the autumn equinox. So if you'll keep that in mind, to a higher power, we pray for world peace. And as we mark a change in the seasons, let us mark a change in our individual efforts to bring peace in our lives, our family, our neighborhood, our city, and our state. For this, we all say, Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Go Bucks.
Thank you, Jerry. Teresa, if you would introduce any visiting Rotarians or guests.
Hello, everybody. We've got a couple of guests with us. Dave, our speaker, will be introduced later, but we also have past District Governor Steve Heiser with us today. And we do have another Dublin AM Rotarian visiting. Looks like that's you, Jean. Jean Oliver? Oh, Jean. Oh, okay. 3, 2, 1. There we go. And that's it.
Thank you very much. I guess you can stick right here because you're our sergeant for today.
All right, today is interactive, so I'm going to be walking around. We have a little bit of fun today, and it is, how well do you know your president? Uh-oh. So everybody gets a couple of questions. Everybody gets a chance to do the maximum $2. So we'll start at this table. Yeah, you guys are solo. How many years has Steve been married? Steve, no? 12.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, you're right. Yes, 12. 12.
That's 12.
12 years. All right, this table, what is Steve's wife's name?
Who?
Steve, what is his wife's name? A little bit more than that.
That's still wrong. It's not Mrs. Fairley.
We have a guess of Julie, that's a name.
It's Rebecca Copley.
There we go. How about Charlie? How about your table right here? Tell me who, name and age is his oldest child.
10-year-old Bob.
And
It's Max and he's 6.
And I love to make that.
Yeah.
oh, I need a pop carrier, don't I?
Apparently a lot of
Every
people like
time I
Max.
get the happy dollars in a minute. I get so excited about this orange stuff. How about up front? How about the youngest child, and what is that child's name?
Sean Tell, 2 years old.
Close.
And
It's Ruthie and she's 3.
how about you guys? What month is Steve's birthday?
I'm ageless.
No.
March.
And what is Steve's favorite color? Back to this table.
It's on the primary color wheel, I'll tell you that.
No.
What does that say about how you think of me. That's your guess. It's green.
It's green. Okay, we still have lots more. How about row your table again? How old is Steve?
That's not nice.
Sure it is. I don't care. 36.
There we go. What does Steve have for pets over here?
Yeah.
2 dogs is the answer.
I got nothing.
None.
I've got groundhogs.
You take credit for 2, Mike.
All right, guys, back to you right here. What is Steve's favorite sport?
This is tricky. No. I don't follow sports.
How
Yeah.
about right here? What is his favorite season of the year? There you go.
Yeah.
Hey. We gotta get money out of you two over here. If, this is gonna be good, you'll definitely be getting the dollars out. If Steve could have a car, what would it be?
Oh, jeez.
Make and color. Oh, what color?
Close.
Close. A red Pagani.
I don't even know what that is. I don't even know what that is.
You can't have a green
It's
car,
a-
be a turtle.
Yeah.
Okay, I got one more. What is the worst thing Steve did for recreation that he'll never do again? This table. The worst thing he did as a recreation that he'll never do again. Good guess. Run a marathon was the guess.
It's close. Horseback riding. I will never ride another horse in my life.
I'm with you on that one.
No way. Too
All
scary.
right, let the dollars out, and I think we're ready for happy dollars. I didn't do those yet. Hey,
I am very happy that Mr. Bruff and Mr. DeFrancesco of our Worthington Marching Band, Worthington Marching Band was nominated and received the Betsy and Kroger Educators of the Year Award.
who else has happy dollars? Hello? Hi, Dee. She's over there. Making a change. Okay,
Joe Patrick.
And I leave on Friday. Stairs.
Oh, no, that's very.
Boo!
How about on Zoom? Who do we have on Zoom that has a happy dollar? Joe?
I do. I'd just like to say, I'm glad that my son has finished the lion's share of his Eagle project, and Dr. Rice can attest that it's there at the back of the Presbyterian Church. We're coming right along. So that, and he was promoted to line leader at the marching band. We're not as happy about that because he was promoted because the guy in front of him had some illicit substance in his locker and got kicked out. So we're happy anyway, but just not as happy. So that's it. Thanks.
Very good. Any other happy dollars? Oh, go ahead.
I didn't have money last time, so. The father's birthday on September 3rd at school, and that's what I was. For if you're in Rotary and taking that to coffee.
Happy dollars. Charlie?
Meeting number, I'm not sure.
11?
Very good.
That's your 11.
All
Yeah.
right, we got a pack schedule. Does everybody remember Steve's oldest child's age and name?
Yes.
Six.
There we go. Yay.
Thank you, Teresa. All right, anybody with announcements, please make your way up here. So that's Jerry, that's Paul, other people with announcements, come on up. This one is very important, listen up. We have our official district governor visit on October 7th. Now, you may say to yourself, Steve, that's not a Wednesday, and you'd be right, it is not a Wednesday. So we are doing a multi-club district governor visit with the Dublin AM Worthington AM, Marysville, and ourselves at the Dublin AM meeting location. It is a Friday. They do breakfast, so it's an early Friday. It is October 7th, 7:30 a.m. at the, I gotta get this right, the Country Club at Muirfield Village. There will be registration required. There will be a breakfast buffet, and so I will start sending out a link and telling you guys ad nauseum that do not come October, what is it, 5th, come October 7th. Okay. I'm also pleased to announce that your board met last Thursday and we approved the membership of Scott Lawrence. I don't see him on today, but we will be inducting him very soon. And now I'm going to turn it over to Jerry.
Your board did some other stuff too. For one thing, I held on to these $2 that you've all been putting in forever. I think maybe this started before I ever joined, so maybe 47 years ago. That has been raised to $3. So now it's inflation time, folks, but there's a good message behind it. And the message is your raffle tickets are going to cost you more too, because now it's 1 ticket for $2 and 3 tickets for $5. You got it? So bring extra money. The real reason for this is so we can make our social pot of money larger. More socials, more money. Thank you very much.
Wasn't there something coming up in a couple of years that we're also trying to get ahead of?
Oh, yes. How old is this club? 48. Our president says it to call the meeting to order every time. 48. So in 2 years, if I'm not very good with numbers. And so I think it'll be 50 years. We'd like to have a suitable celebration for 50 years. Looking out over this room, I hope you're all here. No, in this room, I mean, for our 50th anniversary. So we'll be working on that as a club so that we can do that properly. Now, I also was a little disappointed today in myself and others, because our president's been serving now on 2 years and we still don't know much about it.
He's a very private person.
He's a very private person.
I try to keep to myself. Okay, another announcement, we have the food drive coming up, I believe it's October 29th. Does anybody know if that's active? Yes, thank you, Katie. So I have a sign-up sheet by way of Andrew Singholz that I'm gonna pass around. Oh, it says on here, 9 to noon. We need captains, we need volunteers. Looks like we've got 4 locations. So yeah, there's 20 slots here, more than 20 people in this room, so let's fill it up. Pass this around, please. Okay. Finally, yes, Paul. Yeah.
One of the really fun things about Rotary is working on some of the different committees, and one of the ones that I've been on is the service committee, and it's a group of veterans and newer Rotarians, and we meet once a month and talk about projects that will serve our community and serve Rotary. And at our last meeting, we began to talk about, well, how do we choose these things, and what's the genesis of what we do in the service committee? And there were a couple ideas about, well, the focus area of Rotary, and then we realized that the focus areas have changed in terms of, now they're called causes, our causes. And up on the screen, I have the causes, and you know those: peace and conflict resolution, disease prevention, water and sanitation, maternal and child health, basic education and literacy, economic and community development, and protecting the environment. And they're the 7 causes that we try to align the work of the committee, the service committee, to do. And so we're kicking off a new project today, and it falls under the category of basic education and literacy. And the group decided that we would scan the Worthington schools and try to help some of our neediest schools. And one that stood out was Slade Hill Elementary. And I know we've worked with Slade Hill in the past. They are a school with a very high free and reduced lunch population, but they're also a school that's been very active with community groups in the past, and they've done a lot of these things. So we decided that we would approach them and see what they need. And they have a wonderful principal named Julie Gully, and she went back to her teachers and said, hey, the Dublin Worthington Rotary wants to help us. What can we use? What do we need? What could we use their help for? And she outlined 6 things for us in terms of the needs. 3 of them are classroom volunteers. And I've already had a number of people coming up to me and say, hey, that's what I want to be involved in. I want to go and help kids in the classroom. So the 3 classroom volunteer activities are library volunteers. If you've ever been in a school library, you know they're very active places, lots of books out, lots of new books coming in, shelving, checking in, helping the librarians. So that's one area that they could use some help. Classroom volunteers. Julie was emphatic that said that there's kids who in large classes don't really have an opportunity to focus, or their language skills are delayed, or they have proficiency issues, and having some people come in either to the classroom and help them focus, or take them out and read with them and do other things, that would be a wonderful opportunity. And having been a principal for 20 years, I know that the hardest part of the day is recess. And so no matter how many teachers you have out there, no matter how many people you have out there, you have to have eyes in the back of your head to ensure safety, ensure that everybody's getting along, that there's good social and emotional interactions with the kids and things like that. So that was the 3rd area. These are all volunteer kind of things, and in order to do them, we'll work with Julie and the teachers and determine times to do it. I'm guessing it's going to be maybe an hour a week, an hour and a half a week if you have it. If you want to do it a couple days a week, you can do that, but that's all. The other area that Julie said that they could really use help in, and I know after we did the buddy boxes, I know this club likes to do those kinds of one-time event things where they help out. So they have 3 things. They have a fall fun fest. They get those blow up slides, and they have a hayride, and they have games and things like that. And this would be a great time to help volunteer, ensure safety. I think it's also a good recruiting time for Rotary to set up a table, because grandparents come to these things oftentimes. And so parents and grandparents come, and these could be potential members. They also have a book fair. Fits in right with our literacy initiatives. They have a company comes in, brings all kinds of books in, the kids go through and buy the books, and the librarian needs help, hands-on help that day to help kids find books, help kids check the books out, things like that. And then the 3rd one is an interesting one. I know we have several aspiring and professional writers in the group, and they have a 4th grade poetry reading session. And so those who might be might relate to that could have that opportunity too. It's 7:30 on a Friday morning in December. The 4th graders assemble with their parents and grandparents and others, and they share their poetry and their writings there. So the process is very simple, but everybody who participates and volunteers has to get a background check and a school volunteer badge kind of thing. It's very easy to do. You just have to go to their website, worthington.k12.oh.us, scroll down the side, to quick links. At the bottom of quick links, it says become a volunteer. You click on it. I did it. It takes 90 seconds at most to do, and they mail you a badge. And then when you go into the school, you just show that to the secretary. And they give you a name tag for that day. Very easy to do. The only exception to that is if you haven't lived in Ohio for 5 years, you have to go to the Human Resources Department at the Worthington Education Center and check in with them because they've got to do a more extensive background check. Anyway, it's a project. You can see it's going to be over several months. If you're at all interested, I put the sheet to get your background check. You can use the QR code, or you can just copy down the website address. And I also put a sheet on the table for the different activities. Put your name on it, your email, and check the ones you want to be involved in. Or if other things come up during the year, you want to do that, check that out. So this officially is the kickoff of the Slate Hill Community Service Project. And we hope that a number of you decide that you want to share your time and expertise with the students at Slate Hill. Thank you.
Paul, for launching this effort and your community service committee for keeping this going. It's going to be great. I'm excited. All right, in the interest of time, we're going to speed along. We've got Dave set up a nice presentation around the vocational active service for us. So it's a little bit of preamble or
Hello, everybody. So many of you know today's speaker is going to talk to us about ethics in business. And so several months ago, Dave Kittredge and I and our board of directors were in a meeting, and we were talking about all the different avenues of service. And one of the avenues of service that our board didn't really recognize as something that our club was participating in was the vocational service. And so as we got to talk about it, we realized that vocational service is something that each of us is doing each and every day in our professions and in our lives, but we're not necessarily recognizing it even here within our club. So I wanted to take a few moments to talk to you about what vocational service is and what our club is currently doing in that regard, and how that will relate back to our speaker later on business ethics. So, who's got it? Sorry.
Yep.
So vocational service serves others by our unique skills. So each of us have different talents, different aspects of our careers that we are. Some of us are grant writers. Some of us are good with numbers. Some of us are good with other people, activities. So all of us have those unique skills, and we use those skills when we plan activities within our club, within our jobs, all throughout our lives, personal and professionally. And as we use these skills, we hope that we empower others to grow and to learn and to foster those skills in them as well. So I can speak to myself with regard to like Interact students. I'm constantly mentoring them and working with them and helping them to work and move forward in developing their skills so that they become better leaders. And of course, my involvement with RILA also speaks to that. But I'm sure each and every one of you has something that you can point to that you're currently doing, that maybe it's a skill you have through your profession or maybe not, but that you're also using in your everyday life. So we want to connect our professional life with our club. And in doing so, if we look at the activities that our club is currently doing, I can probably name several that we are already using those skills. I look at our club's foundation. The resources that our club's foundation members use in helping people each and every time that they do are because of who they are and their connections and their profession. So all of us have those skills, and I want to encourage us to use those moving forward. I put on your tables, you'll notice I put on your tables the Rotary Code of Conduct and the object of Rotary. These are two things that are included every month in our Rotary magazine. And I venture to guess that most of us just glance through the magazine, looking through the pages, and never take a look at those items. But I encourage you to take a look at those and think about how those aspects apply to your life, to your business, to your profession. And then moving forward, how we can improve and work forward in becoming ethical and highly, use integrity and high ethical standards in our business and professional lives. I'm going to ask David Kittredge to introduce our speaker today, but I hope that if you have any questions on vocational service, that you'll ask David or I. We are hoping to build a committee within our club that will work on projects that we will focus on in this aspect of service. And of course, looking for a chair. David Kittredge and I are both on the board of directors and will be the liaison between that committee and the board. But if anyone has any interest in working toward developing more projects, we certainly are interested in talking with you. So please reach out to either of us or of course our president, Steve. Thank you.
Following Rose comments, and in terms of our discussion today about business ethics, I'm proud and pleased to introduce to you attorney David Friel, who most recently was on the faculty of the Fisher College of Business as a senior lecturer. He's also with the John Glenn Policy Institute, and prior to that, he was 11 years on the faculty at the Moritz College of Law. And he was 17 years as director of the nonpartisan Ohio Ethics Commission, where he worked with the state of Ohio to promote ethics and litigate those kinds of professional issues. He's also served as an assistant prosecutor for state and federal ethical criminal issues, has done international consulting, and I think you'll enjoy his talk today. And he has a law degree from Capital and a bachelor's degree from the Ohio State University. So please welcome David Friel.
For a couple of things out here. As the slide says, you know, our memory, particularly as we get older, I know as I get older, I'm much younger than I am, mostly. We forget a lot of things. And I'm sure, hopefully, some of the things I talk about today won't be forgotten, particularly within the discussion that Ro preceded you with respect to your pledge and what you do. Thanks to David and Ro and Steve for the invitation to talk to you. This is my first visit to York. We've lived in Worthington Hills next to the club for 40 years. I haven't been over here before, but I've traveled around the state, probably 85 or 86 out of the 88 counties in my history. And I've spoken at a variety of little clubs around the state overall. You may or may not know that golf certainly has done a lot of wonderful ethical things for society and business historically, and some not so much. 17 years ago, I was reminded when I drove in here that we dealt with Inverness up in Toledo. Some of you may know there's a golf course up there. It's called the Cedar, opened several times. When a former governor of the state of Ohio met with a lobbyist and public official and influencer by the name of Tom Noe, and proceeded to have Tom Noe ask for another $25 million of your workers' compensation money to invest in coins and collectibles. That's the so-called CoinGate scandal in Ohio in 2005. By the way, there were no Beanie Babies in those collectibles, so we lucked out in that regard. That $25 million investment did not go forward because of attention to the prior $50 million that had been invested within that fund overall. I think there are actually 2 people that may still be in jail as a result of that. The former chief fiscal officer of the Bureau of Workers' Compensation. And unfortunately, I won't mention the name of you know it, of a major broker in the United States who was part of the influence that went on with bribes to the former CFO. In fact, cash given in envelopes at Worthington Inn, cash given in envelopes down the short north, Rigsby used to be down there, and a variety of other places overall. So with that, I have both bittersweet and positive memories of golf and what goes on in golf. As you may know or see, and has been said, I'm a lawyer and an academic and an Irish guy, so I can talk forever. And I would ask for your questions throughout this, so please raise your hand down or screen if I don't hear you otherwise. Most recently, having retired from the Ethics Commission in 2010, having taught the graduate program at Fisher in the Business School of Business with MBAs, graduate accounting students, business logistics students, a variety of students all around in the college. And ethics, values, leadership, decision-making, part of which I'm going to talk about today overall. But having early in my career taught full-time for 4 years now, 4 years at College of Law at Ohio State litigation, in between a variety of other things overall. I just want to say that, you know, sometimes when I'm asked to speak, somebody's done something wrong. I hear today everybody's done things well. That's the other opportunity. Sometimes I'm asked to speak, so here we are to talk a little bit about ethics overall. I do want to suggest to you that ethics there are some falsehoods around it. One is that ethics itself is just compliance, and that it's oppressive, that it's not empowering. And part of your discussion with your code is the empowerment that you have as professionals for community and others. That law ethics requires maximizing profit short term above all else. Sometimes the justification for maximizing profit is that it's law, or that it's an ethical obligation. It is not. The Supreme Court settled that discussion in 2014 in a case called Hobby Lobby. A conservative 4-5-4 majority decided and cited law involving business and said, no, it is not a requirement under law or under ethics to maximize profits as a matter of law above all else. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And then with respect to decision making, that we trust our gut most often and just put our finger to the wind when it comes to ethical challenges. I would imagine for most of you in your experiences, you found that this is not true. It's very helpful. What the research shows, and that's always a bad sign when someone says it's an academic, but the research shows it's most often in instantaneous decisions, about 80% of the time, our gut is helpful. But in more complex decisions, it can really derail us. And as with any academic, I've got a bunch of slides here. It's not my intent to get through them all, but there's a slide we'll talk a little bit about that. Generally. Ethics. What the hell is ethics? You know, sometimes I say ethics is like beauty in the eyes of the beholder. As to how we see it, what our perceptions are, what our views are. Consulting for law firms. I've got a case down in Southern Ohio involving alleged misconduct by the county auditor. He's been indicted for that alleged misconduct involving an 88-year-old farmer who competed with a property owner. And the question of what we perceive, what our values are, is that ethics is something else. Really, these are all linked, but really ethics is about not only compliance to the rules and what the rules are, what the standards are, but also what our values are, what the needs of our values, and how those values are expressed. Oftentimes, when we talk about ethics, we don't talk about decision making. What's the impact of our values? Not just what our intent is. There's a famous quote from a lawyer and ethicist. I'm not a big fan of him necessarily, but I like some of what he said out on the West Coast. Named Michael Josephson, had family money to develop an ethics institute. Said we judge ourselves by our intent, but we're judged by our last worst act. In other words, our actions decide what ethics is, because ethics is the perspective of standards and values of others, not just our intention overall. I love the statement by Loan McCoy, an investment banker years ago. Some of you, if you've had professional education in business, may have seen or read what's called the parable of the sadhu. It's easily obtainable online. It's supposedly a story about Bowen and McCoy traveling up the Himalayas to Mount Everest with his friend, an anthropologist. Some of us might be skeptical of that setup, an anthropologist and an investment banker. But traveling up the mountain and not making it to Everest finally, because in their path falls a sadhu, a Himalayan, Nepalian holy man. And the question is, do they stop and help him? And can they individually as a team, or do they proceed up the mountain? And I'll leave you to read the story and what it's about. But what McCoy comes back to draw parables out of that, judgments out of that about business and enterprise, is ethics is about the integrity of the enterprise. But it's also about the challenge of decision making, what he calls making a tough decision in a muddle of ambiguity. I've always asked my students in graduate school what you really think about the meaning of that phrase is a muddle of ambiguity, but I know you faced it because you had a lifetime as well as I have. So one device that I created for my students was just looking at this from the triangular side. What's the rules? What can get me fired? What can get me, push me out of my role? Worst case scenario, what can get me indicted, like the existing county auditor of Butler County right now? What in the middle of that are the values? What has the integrity of the enterprise reflected? What's their code? What's their core? Like your code of conduct as an association. And then at the top of that, what are our own core values? And not all core values are ethical. So we have to, getting things done on time might be a value, may not be an ethical one under the right circumstances. And how do they interact? And oftentimes, if we don't have the first two, we have to rely on the third. That gets to our judgment overall. This is not unusual. This is a PwC slide from this notion of how we look at ethics, how we look at it from a decisional side. And I suggest if you put overlays on this, you come into the same conclusions about compliance, about the rules, about the regs, whether we like them or not, whether we enjoy them or not, and what the values of the enterprise or individual professional or our office, just a few people ourselves, our professionals are, and then how we implement them generally. By the way, as a lawyer, law is really a limited ethical standard. I can tell you numerous times in my years of tenure at the Ethics Commission, we had an active 150 cases statewide authority. All of the conduct under the ethics law is criminal. It's criminal. By the way, it applies to public officials at all levels of government, state law. It applies to all of us doing business with public officials. So some of my interviews at times were with CEOs and private sector people, and oftentimes they were unaware they were governed by felony and misdemeanor provisions under ethics law since 1975. The reality is that when we think about law, we sometimes say, well, just tell me what the rules are. And is that enough? And as we all know, appearances can be damning beyond the law. It does necessarily provide us with some baselines as to what is how society perceives what we do. But as I tell my students, it used to be a felony in Mississippi and Alabama in 1965 for me as a white male to marry an African American female. It was a felony under law in Mississippi and Alabama in 1965, folks, in the United States of America. So when we think about law can be an ass. That's the saying goes. Question is, are we disregarding law for our own self-interest, or the interest of our compensation, or employers, or somebody else? Or are we really standing up in the front of the bus for what we believe is right, what is true? The ethics triangle sometimes is looked at as a so-called fraud triangle. For those of you who are in the financial sector, around for a long period of time, how we look at and how we navigate fraud. What's the opportunity? What's the rationalization? What's the process? Most in experience and expertise say we can affect process, we can affect opportunity. We have a tough time affecting motivation. And that's when we get back to why we do what we do. Great scholar just recently retired from the University of Virginia at I'll think of the business school there, the PhD program, at been at Harvard in the business program, ethics program there, named Mary Gentili has a program called Giving Voice to Values that's been used for a long time. Mary's research has been that really most of us know what's ethical, what's not under the circumstances. We just don't do it for a variety of reasons. And the question is why? What's that gap? And oftentimes it's the question of rationalization. It's the question of invested self-interest, some of which we may not even recognize. Some that might be embedded in our DNA, so-called inappropriate self-interest. But we're still evolving, coming out of the forest 10,000 years ago, protecting our hindsight, our backside. This question emanates itself in how we're viewed as public officials. This is a Gallup poll that's been going on for 40 years. Really has not changed very much when you look at the top of the folks on the Gallup poll. You can see perhaps not very well back there because it's so small. Who stands up there for nurses, physicians, sometimes those in the medical profession are up there at the top. Unfortunately, at the bottom is us as business professionals. As I tell my students, I'm glad they would look at me as an academic or a lawyer because I may be a little bit above where the general public looks at myself. Now, some would say that's the media. Reality is it's not. This has not changed for 40 years, unless you think the media has been the problem for 40 years. In some ways, it hasn't. These have gone points up, points down, but not fundamentally changed for us as business officials, business professionals. Why? What's going on here? What are we doing? I'm a neophyte. I'm a Pollyannic believer from dealing with businessmen and women across this state, across the country, actually internationally, that most of them want to do and do the ethical thing overall. So, Lynn Payne, who's another prophet that's been around this arena for a long period of time, at Harvard's Business School, still teaching there. By the way, her middle name is Sharp. So as I told my students, you could have it worse. You could have Sharp Payne as your ethics instructor, or Friel, which is often pronounced in 4 letters, obscene many times, or Friel for various times. Her theory of why there's been a value shift in the last few years is fundamental. When you think about this, it's a lot of common sense. Risk management, question of organizational stability, better generalize its culture. Market position, think of ESG right now. Environment, sustainability, governance, is it real? Does it have metrics? Is it not? By the way, last I checked, $8 trillion in ESG in just the last 10 years in investment. $8 trillion. I think it's 25% of all investment in the United States worldwide. Civic position. Think of an outfit like Jenny's, for example. You're born and bred here in Columbus, Ohio. Or what was recently transpired with Patagonia, oftentimes a lot of child, this question of ethical behavior in society. But it's best, just the right thing to do. I know my father-in-law, who had a successful business in Syracuse overall, and a growing bakery, lifeblood of the family for many, many years, a survivor, lost his family in the Holocaust, came to this country at the age of 17, was drafted in the Baptist Tank Corps, went back and fought in his homeland. Went back to his house dressed up on PE Day, found native Germans living in his home, tried to burn it down. I'd like to think I would have done the same. I know his desire was that all people should be respected, and he did as he went along. He thought it was the best thing to do. He made good money in that business. Risk management, or increased organizational opportunity. We've got a lot of examples here of this. Bad ones, Wells Fargo, Uber, Theranos. Unfortunately, for a long time, it was us men leading the parade. You know the story of Elizabeth Holmes, it's been fictionalized now, a variety of specialist overalls, a young lady who tried to model Steve Jobs, lied to everybody about success, fake it until you make it, but actually practice that overall. You may not know the story of Rolls-Royce PLA out of Mount Vernon, Ohio. And that is a story that is pretty sad. I'll talk about in just a second. But then we've got a lot of positive examples. Nationwide Insurance, the mutual stepped off the stock exchange, doesn't have the same pressures for quarterly returns. It is one of the leading stellar examples, I can tell you from research around the country. And you talk to their folks, and you talk to their agents, and I think you'll find the same thing. You look at questions of locally, Wasserstrom, a 5th-generation family business, has 1,500 employees, 5th leading restaurant supplier in Columbus, Ohio. a traditionally Jewish family led by a CFO who's a Mormon, who's a Church of Latter-day Saints practitioner. Really fascinating structure overall. Moody Nolan, the largest African-American architecture firm in the country, built the Ohio Union, built a shop, built a Nashville Music Center. He's building places all around the country right now. And in fact, will be part of President Obama's library in Chicago, with now 320 new buildings. Just recently, the paper had an article on growth overall. Articles all the time about these successful enterprises. Going back to Rolls-Royce in Mount Vernon. Rolls-Royce was part of PLA, was a professional engineering company. It is not an automobile company, as some people might think of it. But 4 principals, one of whom was a domestic national from the United States out of Texas, 3 others from other places around the world, conspired to bribe foreign countries, 7 countries over 6 years. They were found out in 2017, prosecuted here in Columbus, Ohio, in the federal district court for bribery. The company pled guilty to a conspiracy to bribery. They falsified emails and created a symbolic system within their emails to cover their bribes overall. Unfortunately, 500 good-paying jobs were lost in Mount Vernon as a result. And it was closed after taken over by Siemens. Now, would they, Siemens closed them down eventually or not? Perhaps we don't know the answer to that. This, by the way, was discovered out of the world's largest corruption scandal in Brazil, where I traveled in 2018 with Siemens, involving an outfit called Petrobras, Odebrecht, an age-old German company there. It spread scandal all around the world, and that's where this issue discovery, PLA, Rolls-Royce came from. So corruption around the world bounces back locally in different kinds of ways. This question of culture has been around for a long time. How do we measure? How do we look at it? What does it mean? But what the research again shows, and what my experience shows, I can tell you, when we think of Wells Fargo, we have all kinds of compliance standards, all kinds of ethics processes, just screwed up on a regular basis in senior leadership. Culture trumps compliance. Some of you may have heard before the whole notion of culture eats strategy for breakfast. It's the same with respect to compliance overall. These are PwC figures that demonstrate how misbehavior affects employees, affects morale, affects the bottom line, affects, if we're talking about shareholder value, increasing shareholder profits, what it does and what it means generally. Recently, we looked at the question of the Great Resignation. MIT Sloan academics have looked at it and said, really, it's all about toxic culture, as opposed to necessarily moving on to someplace that makes more money. By far, the greatest predictor, most important, more than compensation, was culture. Question of failure to promote diverse other enterprise values, inclusion, being disrespected by employers, and unethical behavior generally. This is a slide from Nationwide Business talking about the empowerment of ethics. If you notice some of the listings, they're all about ethical behavior. Employees value their enterprise. They are more engaged. They have measures of engagement in their employees that far exceed the insurance industry and other places. That brings value back to the enterprise. It means profits are increased back to the enterprise. So this notion that ethics is not good business has its own falsehood, generally. This is from Moody Nolan and their values. And they've had these values since they started by Kurt Moody years ago as an African American who couldn't get strong employment research opportunities within the existing architecture firm, not on his own, with an African American engineer in Columbus, Ohio, and has done well as a result of that. So let's get to just, in the brief time that we've got, this question of decision making. If we don't have strong rules, and I'm not talking about bureaucratic crap in terms of organization, I'm talking about meaningful, clear, concise, rational regulation or oversight in our organization. If we don't have clear values in our organization, then we have to fall back to our own decision making. individually. So when you think about this in an enterprise of 500 people, that could be hundreds of different decision makes on the same factual pattern. And that's what we see happen. And that's where things go awry generally. Could be 5 people where the standards aren't clear. I've seen it happen at Ohio State University. Look what happened with respect to recent physician at Ohio State University covered up misconduct for years involving sexual abuse of men. Not unlike Michigan State, not unlike Southern California, not unlike other colleges, Penn State, where misconduct was happening directed at women or kids generally. So if we're talking about decision making, how does our gut work overall? Again, some pretty critical research has looked at this question with a variety of professions, including docs. Talk about how much we can increase the efficiency, effectiveness, efficacy of our decision making by objective processes. Why is that true? It's because we're brainwired for our self-interest. That's in our DNA. Sometimes it's very positive. It's probably the reason why many of you have been successful in your careers. Sometimes, though, it can be pretty negative when it comes to decision making. And our own self-interest is at stake as opposed to those we have to serve above us. And this organization is all about. Again, research is focused on this more and more. There's the whole field of behavioral economics, and the notion that the market is rational as opposed to perhaps the reality that it's not. We make individual decisions in our own self-interest. Some costs, for example, we pour money into an investment, it's losing, but we keep pouring more money in, hoping it'll come back up rather than pulling it out. Being able to invest in some other kind of way. The whole notion of this question of inappropriate self-interest has been explored by neurologists as part of our brain, and it goes on chemically, but also as part of our behavior aspect, behavioral ethics overall. Self-interest, so-called inappropriate self-interest, affect us all. It influences even when we don't think it does, or even when we say that it doesn't, generally. And it's difficult to compensate for if we don't realize it's there innately. It's easier to argue our position when we generally believe the false argument, unaware of the influence that our self-interest may be manifesting on us overall. Truly believe we are wrong, we are right when we are flat out wrong. When we are flat out wrong. Convince ourselves that we're being fair or ethical as against others. Characterize the opposing view as self-interest or irrational. How many times have we seen this in discussions lately in our society, what we do? Without listening and thinking and critically examining what the other point of view might be. Would it be ethics, would it be otherwise? Short-term interest can be particularly persuasive in this regard, particularly our own compensation is an issue, our own family's an issue. The issue allegedly involving the county auditor down in Butler County is about him protecting, allegedly protecting the interests of his father and his own property interests against adjacent property of an 88-year-old farmer and minister, as against his public duties and obligations as an auditor to the rest of us. The notion of a conflict of interest. We've got a superior duty and obligation. We've got a compelling interest that yanks at our heart, pulls at our heartstrings, and draws us away from that superior interest of the world. That's a conflict of interest, by the way. This is a medical journal talking about for physicians and what it may mean generally. I can't tell you how many times in my tenure at the Ethics Commission, we examined about 150 investigations from statewide authority all the way from minor stuff to major stuff. I'm the one that signed a criminal complaint against the governor in 2005. In 2010, before I left, I signed a criminal complaint against the Attorney General of the state of Ohio. One was a Democrat, one was a Republican. As I said, the Ohio Ethics Commission bipartisanly through Republicans and Democrats was an equal opportunity ethics abuse. The reality is that when it comes to conflict of interest and inappropriate interest, we didn't have the money for empirical research. That was the majority of the costs in many of those investigations. About 8% of our cases from the criminal prosecution Only 2 reversals occurred in my career on a yearly basis. Now, throughout my entire tenure. Reality was we had to look at facts, we had to make those facts fit beyond reasonable doubt criminal cases, not just whether somebody walked over the line, which most often is not the reason why we get in trouble. It's usually the cover up of walking over the line. Like the former chief of staff of Governor Boynton did with a home up in Marysville. And obligate and remove the $100,000 discount that he received from the state contract for fear of being caught for a role. This question of psychological basis, academics have challenged us more, particularly as fellow academics, to think about. What are those behavioral aspects that affect us? What do they mean? How can we talk to students about that? How can we talk to professionals about that? Just remind us that in our best heart, our best intent, that we still have challenges with respect to how we process information. What the scientific research suggests is that dopamine levels go up when we receive information that we agree with, confirm our bias. But they go down when we have contradictory information that contradicts factually what our bias may be overall. So I'm going to end with this. Any questions you have? I suggest to our students that one way to think about this is what are the facts, what are the issues, what standards are obligated, whether you agree with them or not, which ones would you prefer, which ones would you think of? Where do you get help? Where do you get assistance? We don't often think about assistance when we need assistance in challenging situations, whether it be professional, whether it be others. But there are folks and people there to help us. We're not alone in this. What are our expectations going in? Do we expect to be ethical, or do we expect to make the most money on the deal at that point? No matter what we do what we have to do. Do we expect to love our family and love our friends? But when it comes to business, somehow see that it's a different segment of our professional life and do something different there. And then how we reflect upon it. By the way, this is a mnemonic device for my Fisher students. What is facts, issues, standards, help, enterprise, reflection. Part of the reason for that is we remember mnemonic devices. We think about them. And the reality is that it is backed by the research. It is not just BS to be frank. It has meaning. It has support in both the research and experience and what has transpired and how we operate. I went to the Notre Dame game with my oldest son, who's in finance in Chicago for 20 years. The 2 of his friends from Notre Dame who were delighted at the result of the game. I'm being sarcastic. We're supposed to go to Notre Dame with them next year. And one of them, who's got his MBA from Northwestern, asked me about what I did, and we talked about it. He said, you know, I had ethics, a bit of ethics at Northwestern, didn't have a lot of it. So I went into the session and kept wanting some mechanism, some strategy to decide ethical problems. I said, well, I don't know whether you'd like it or not, but here's one. The most important questions from my point of view really are, what are you about? What have you been? What do you want to be? If some people think of that, whatever they've done in their career, they get the legacy and they start looking back and geez, that should be something different than I was. What kind of leader are you? Why do you want people to respect you, work for you? Want to be empowered by you, not be suppressed by you? How do you want to be thought of? How do you want to be remembered by those you love and those you care about? So, as Groucho Marx, my favorite ethicist, said, you remember Groucho Marx? Yes. Groucho Marx, those are my principles, and if you don't like them, I have others. So, with that, questions? I know we don't have much time. I still 105 or so. No questions. Bill, my responsibility.
I have a
Steve.
question. I don't even know if it's a good question. I'm afraid to ask it. Because I don't know if it makes sense.
All
Over
questions.
time, do you think people have become more or less technical in different periods of time? And where do you think we are today?
Yeah, the first thing I answered, I like to be factual. First thing I answered, we don't know. Empirically, we just don't know. I mean, we've got more research than we ever had in this field of ethics. As I've told friends nationally, internationally, when I travel on behalf of the OECD or US embassies. It's only 5 decades old, 6 decades, maybe from the 50s. Some of them around Johnson & Johnson in the 60s and 70s, removing Tylenol from the shelves was the first major company for a recall voluntarily. Forget, with J&J, particularly recently. So we don't really know. My belief is we have much more transparency with respect to actions. You know, I can tell you from being at the State House, being around senior leadership, the Ethics Commission has jurisdiction over 500,000 people estimated in the state of Ohio, all in public service, school districts, colleges, and universities, others around, except the legislature and judiciary, and they each have their own ethics bodies, and despite falsehoods, they have referred people for prosecution as well. We had former Speaker of the House, former President of the Senate, and I think because of more and more information, whether we do that, whether it be information or critique, we know more, we're aware of more. But in prior years, a lot of backroom stuff was done. I had a chair of the finance committee was a Democrat at the legislative state. We created the ethics commission to look good, not because you do something. We're not going to give you more money to do more things. The reality is that we just don't. Any questions?
I think we're running out of time. Thank you very much for coming to speak. with us
Thank you.
today.
And thank you to Ron and David for setting up, our vocational service liaisons for setting up this presentation. All right, 1:06, we're not late, but we're moving right along. Before we wrap up, well, next week our speaker is going to be TJ Cusick. He is the school treasurer of the Worthington school system. He's going to be talking about the bond issue that's coming up, and so I would think that'd be very important to a lot of people here. Okay, now we're ready for the wrap. Paul.
Get your tickets out, there's $10 in the pot today.
That's the last small pot we'll ever have.
Yes. 501-920.
920. Jerry.
All right, Jerry. I'm an ethical winner.
How much in the Ace of Spades?
There's $97 in the Ace raffle, so. Pick this one. 501-897.
897. Good job, bro. I'm glad we where it is. I got it.
Jack of spades.
All right.
Good job.
Thank goodness. I know. All right, before we wrap up, as usual, we say the four-way test. So if you will join me.
I think you all know this is our ethical. The four-way test is our ethical Bible.
Of the things we think, say, and do. First, is it true? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third,
Will build goodwill and better friendship.
and fourth,
Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Thank you, everybody, for a great meeting. Have a great rest of your week. We are adjourned.
This is.
I know.